one down lower, Frank. Really?
Good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome back to those joining us at home. Hope your lunch break went well. And without further ado, into our third session, over to kind Jill.
Session 3. Dublin, the Professor, Overwork, Ill Health, and Despair. We're going to start with a really cheerful afternoon. Before lunch, we left Hopkins in St Bynum's, just about to be ordained priest, on the 23rd of September 1877, when his first 9 years of initial training came to an end. 9 years of relatively stable and ordered life, spent in 3 Jesuit training houses in Roehampton, Stonyhurst and St Bynum's. That stability and predictability changed with his ordination. He was then sent out on a number of postings as the last part of his training before final vows. Thereafter, he might expect to be posted to a place where he would serve for some time to fulfill a particular need for the Society of Jesus and for the Church. In the following 6 years after his ordination, Hopkins had 13 different postings. This was quite usual at the time. He was sent to Chesterfield, Stonyhurst, Lancashire, London, Bristol, Oxford, Greater Manchester, Liverpool, Glasgow, Roehampton, Preston, Maryport and Manchester. Some of these were for longer periods of a year to 18 months. The longest was as a curate to St Aloysius here in Oxford, now the Oratory Church. It was then a Jesuit church. He found Oxford was a very different place from that he had known as an undergraduate, as he was outside the university, now a Catholic priest, and Oxford was rapidly expanding and changing. He wrote some poetry in various of these postings, especially here in Oxford. In all of these places, he was a curate, working as a priest and not as a teacher. In his pastoral ministry, he developed a real affection for the industrial poor. In August 1882, after a final tertianship, years spent back in Roehampton, a sort of second novitiate to renew his spiritual fervour, he took his final vows. He could then expect a longer posting where his gifts could be used by the Society of Jesus and for the Church as a whole. He was sent in September 1882 to Stonyhurst to teach Latin and Greek to London University external BA students, Catholics whose family did not want to send them to Protestant universities. There he began to settle down into a job he enjoyed and a community of congenial confreres. He had sufficient time to write some poetry, to get involved with the observatory run by the Jesuits. He got to know the director of the observatory, Father Perry, SJ, who was a fellow of the Royal Society and an internationally renowned astronomer, and who taught maths to small boys. Hopkins' long-term amateur interest in meteorology rekindled and flourished, so much so that he wrote several letters to Nature about the after effects of the eruption of Krakatoa as seen in unusual sunsets. One of his letters was even quoted in the Royal Society's report on the eruption of Krakatoa and and its worldwide effects. This was quite an achievement, as most of the other quoted observers were professional men of science. It seemed that Hopkins had found a place to thrive and to put down roots. After a year, he feared he might be sent elsewhere. He referred to himself as Fortune's football. But he was left in position in Stonyhurst. I want to look a bit more deeply at where Hopkins was at a personal and spiritual level that September before he went back to Stonyhurst to what he thought was a settled posting. He was 39 years old and had been in the Society of Jesus for 15 years. We have some of his notes from his annual 8-day retreat, taken that September before he went back to Stonyhurst. They make interesting reading and give us an unusual glimpse into Hopkins' inner life. As we saw in the first session, Hopkins had a scrupulous side to his character. In this retreat, using the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, the document around which so much of Jesuit spirituality is based, after a standard meditation on day 5, Hopkins hit some of what we might call now his old stuff. This is what he wrote. In the meditations on the sins, In the meditation on the series of sins, an old and terribly afflicting thought and disgust drove me to found the kingdom. He advised me not to dwell further on the thought. This is wise advice and seemed to have helped, as afterwards Hopkins received some lights and spiritual encouragement. The following day he wrote, I remember Father Whitty teaching how a great part of a life to the holiest of men consists in the the performance, one may say, of ordinary duties. And this comforted me against the thought of the little that I do in way of hard penance. He goes on to record how, during this retreat, I have much and earnestly prayed that God will lift me above myself to a higher state of grace, in which I may have more union with him, being more zealous to do his will and freer from sin. Later that day, after further meditation, Hopkins wrote, in this evening's meditation on the temptations of Jesus, I was with our Lord in the wilderness in spirit, and again begged this, acknowledging it to be a great grace even to have the desire. For indeed it is a pure one, and it is long since I have had so strong and spiritual one, and so persistent. The following day, the 7th of the retreat, Hopkins writes, in meditating on the crucifixion, I saw how any asking to be raised to a higher degree of grace was asking also to be lifted on a higher cross. Then I took it that our Lord recommended me to Our Lady, and her to me. As an aside, I guess we might say to Hopkins, be careful what you pray for. This was at the end of September 1883. What Hopkins didn't know for several months was that various negotiations had been taking place in Dublin between the Irish Roman Catholic bishops and the Jesuits for the society to take over the running of the Catholic University, which Newman had founded but which hadn't flourished, in order that Irish Catholics could have access to a university education. There had been 7 years of various negotiations, which finally meant that the Jesuit University became part of the Royal University, with several colleges in different parts of Ireland. The college on Stephen's Green became University College Dublin for Catholics, whereas the Elizabethan Foundation, Trinity College Dublin, took Protestants from the Anglo-Irish ascendancy. The Jesuit president of the University College, Father William Delaney, SJ, wanted a Jesuit as Professor of Greek, because this post came with an endowed fellowship so that the salary could help fund the running of the college. We are talking serious university politics. Father Delaney approached the English Jesuit provincial, who agreed to release Father Hopkins, who was very well qualified for the post of Professor of Greek, with his Oxford first-class degree in classics and his subsequent teaching experience of BA students for London University exams. In December 1883, Father Delaney went to Stonyhurst to talk to Hopkins about the proposed appointment. Hopkins was diffident about accepting the post, and, it turns out, there were various shenanigans going on. The Irish bishops had put up an Irish, far less well-qualified candidate. However, the Senate warmly endorsed Hopkins, but he was an outsider, an English. This was not the most auspicious beginning for a challenging job. Hopkins arrived in Dublin in February 1884 to take up his post in what was a rather dilapidated building, but as he told Bridges in a letter of the 4th of March,
I have been warmly welcomed and most kindly treated, but Dublin itself is a joyless place, and I think in my heart as smoky as London is. I had fancied it quite different.
He writes of his reaction to the new job as Professor of Greek and being elected to a fellowship.
It is an honour and an opening and has many bright sides, but at present it also has some dark ones, and this in particular, that I am not at all strong, not strong enough for the requirements, and do not see how I am to become so.
Hopkins settles into the job. He even finds time to write a further letter to nature. He has pleasant colleagues and makes friends. But it is a punishing job with a totally huge workload of marking in what might seem like a mad system to us. He set the exam papers and marked them for all the university colleges in Ireland, whereas he only taught in University College Dublin. He took all of this work of setting and marking exams, preparing lectures very seriously. And because he thought it would be unfair, he didn't teach his students what was going to be on the exam paper. Consequently, his lectures were not very well attended, except by those who wanted to know what they didn't need to revise. All this work, and he was living in a strange land. Dublin, although very much part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, was a very different place to London or Liverpool. It was seething with political factions. Many wanted independence from England, or advocating at best home rule. Hopkins was an English patriot, and he found himself in political disagreement with many of those he was living alongside. And, although he began to make good friends, inside and outside society, he felt like an outsider. After a year in Ireland, at the beginning of 1885, he wrote,
"To seem the stranger lies my lot, my life among strangers. Father and mother dear, brothers and sisters are in Christ not near, and he my peace, my parting sword and strife. England, whose honour, all my heart rules, wife to my creating thought, would neither hear me were I plead, nor do I weary of idler being, but by where wars are rife. I am in Ireland now. Now I am at a third remove. Not that in all removes I can kind love both give and get. Only what word wisest my heart breeds. Dark heaven's baffling ban bars, or hell's spell falls. This to hoard unheard, heard unheeded, leaves me a lonely began.
Hopkins in Ireland is physically separated from his family and also separated from them by a difference in religious belief. He Catholic, they Anglican. He is English, but feels critical of many of the political policies of England in relation to the expansion of the empire, etc., as he told his mother. He acknowledged that he has some kind and loving friendships, but also, and probably the worst is, that he finds in his own heart darkness. He cannot find God. There is no contact with the living word. He is unheard and baffled and left lonely, with a begun but unfinished life's work. This is the first of the 6 sonnets of desolation, or the terrible sonnets, as they're sometimes called, written in 1885, but not found until after his death. They are almost certainly the poems that Hopkins told Bridges of in a letter. I have, after a long silence, written 2 sonnets, which I am touching. If anything was written in blood, one of these was. I want to explore these terrible sonnets in some detail. Why focus on such depressing writing, you may ask? Well, because most of us, at some point or another in our lives, hit difficulties, death, grief, depression, ill health, overwork, self-doubt, or despair. It can help to know of someone else who puts these terrible, almost wordlessly awful feelings into words. I have met several people who have found, in times of what to them felt like complete abandonment and despair, that these terrible sonnets were what kept them going and helped bring them through to better and more settled times. But first, it is worth pausing for a moment to consider Hopkins' physical health. He had a small frame and he was lightly built, and he had chronic, low-grade ill health. He had an intestinal and digestive problems for most of his adult life, from at least 1872, when he was at Stonehurst. He had recurrent bouts of diarrhea with bleeding, hemorrhoids, and with frequent indigestion, all accompanied by weakness and persistent fatigue. His superiors recognised his physical frailty, often excusing him Lenten fasts. In Dublin, his workload exacerbated his problems. There, he also developed recurrent eye pain and continuing chronic fatigue and low energy. Through all of this, he heroically continued to try to do his job and be true to his vocation. Hopkins confided some of his ills to his old friend Robert Bridges, who, although he was now a doctor, thought Hopkins was always over-anxious, nervous about himself, and exaggerated his symptoms. More recent modern historical medical research has suggested that Hopkins had a chronic long-term inflammatory bowel disease, possibly Crohn's disease, possibly celiac disease. In Hopkins' day, these diseases were unknown, so his was undiagnosed and untreated. Today, with long COVID and our knowledge of other disabling chronic conditions, we might be more sympathetic. Hopkins got the lack of understanding or belief which many people who have non-standard, difficult to diagnose conditions encounter. His reaction to this was to try to accept this as his lot. In March 1865, Hopkins told Bridges,
I am in a low way of health. Indeed, I always am, but especially now in Lent. Not that I fast, but the restrictions of diet makes a difference to me. The delightful old French father who teaches logic here will have it that I am dying. Of anemia, I am not. Still, I could do with, indeed how gladly I could, as they say, I could do with more life.
It was from this place that Hopkins wrote his next sonnet. I wake and feel the fell of dark, not day. What hours! Oh, what black hours we have spent this night. What sights you, heart, saw, ways you went, and more must, in yet longer light's delay. With witness I speak this, but where I say hours, I mean years, mean life, and my lament is cries, countless cries, like dead letters sent to dearest him that lives, alas, away. I am gall, I am heartburn, God's most deep decree, bitter, would have me taste. My taste was me, bones built in me, flesh filled, blood brimmed the curse, self-yeast of spirit, a dull dough sours. I see, the lost are like this, and their scourge to be as I am mine, their sweating selves, but worse. A terrible night, or no doubt nights of insomnia, of despair, of feeling of being abandoned by God. His cries to his beloved Christ are going unheeded and are like returned dead letters. Think, emails when the address isn't recognised. And in all of this, there are his chronic gastric symptoms, heartburn, and a disgusting taste in his mouth, possibly also bleeding hemorrhoids. And his desolation is made worse by realising the damned are like him, their sweating selves, but worse. That is some awful morning to try to get back to difficult work. But it does get worse for poor Hopkins. In another letter to Bridges, Hopkins told him of his anguishment of body and mind, and my fits of sadness resemble madness. In that state, he wrote, no worst, there is none. Pitched past pitch of grief, more pangs will. Schooled at 4 pangs, wilder ring. Comforter, where is your comforting? Mary, mother of us, where is your relief? My cries heave, herds long, huddle in amain, a chief woe, world sorrow, on an age-old anvil wince and sing. Then full they leave off, fury had shrieked, no lingering, let me be fell, force, I must be brief. Oh, the mind has mountains, cliffs of full, frightful, sheer, no man fathom. Hold them cheap may who ne'er hung there, nor does our long small durance deal with that steep or deep, here creep wretch, under a comfort that serves in a whirlwind. All life death does end, and each day dies with sleep. The relentlessness of grief or despair or depression came in unstoppable waves of terrible emotion, and no one, human or divine, to give comfort. And then the dread of being on the edge of the inner infinite void, hanging onto the cliffs above that awful existential emptiness. Just count them cheap who has not hung there. My guess is that many of you will have had such moments or longer periods of hanging over such frightening inner abyss. I have had glimpses, but only enough to know a very little of what it is like for many others who have found themselves abandoned and bivouacked night after night on just a small, unstable ledge on these mountains of the mind. The only comfort found in the small place in the whirlwind. Remember Job. God came to him out of the whirlwind. This whirlwind brings the thought of some sort of oblivion in death, or at least the escape of sleep, if you should be lucky, at the day's end. In this awful state, Hopkins had the courage to write about a further stage, what you do with these awful feelings and the temptation to suicide.
Not. I'll not. Carrying comfort, despair, not feast on thee. Not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me, or most weary cry, I can no more. I can something, hope, wish day come, not choose not to be. But oh thou terrible, why wouldst thou rude on me, thy ring-whirled right-foot rock, lay a lion limb against me, scan with darksome, devouring eyes my bruised bones, and fan, in turns of tempest, me heaped there, me frantic to avoid thee and flee. Why? That my chaff might fly, my grain lie, sheer and clear. Nay, all that toil, that coil, since seems I kiss the rod, hand rather, my heart, lo, lacked strength, stole joy, would laugh, cheer. Cheer whom, though? The hero whose heaven-handling flung me, foot trod me, or me that fought him? Oh, which one? Is it each one? That night, that year of now done darkness, I, wretch, lay wrestling with my God, my God.
There has been a turn in Hopkins' perception of what is going on in his inner struggle, but not without quite some wrestling match with first himself, and then the inner forces which he eventually realises are the hand of God. This poem is full of biblical references and allusions. I'm sure some of you will have picked up at least some of them. First, in some ways linked with the cliffs of fall, frightful and sheer, is the second temptation of Jesus, where the devil takes him up to the pinnacle of the temple and suggests he throws himself off because God's angels will bear him up lest he dashes his foot against a stone. Jesus answers, "You shall not tempt the Lord your God." I have always thought this could have been a temptation to commit suicide, to throw oneself and one's life recklessly away, as much as to test God's love and power. But it is clear that Hopkins is summoning up all his willpower in a state he feels is almost hopeless, to decide that he can choose. He can use his power and not choose not to be, to choose to resist the temptation to find oblivion through suicide. Hopkins then experiences the terrifying, lion-like presence of something that seeks to devour him. Job also had been hunted down by God, who was like a fierce lion. Job too complained of being broken by tempest and wounded. Hopkins is frantic to avoid all of this and flee. His inner self is like harvested wheat, being winnowed in the wind or with a fan, so that the chaff, the outer covering of the seeds, is blown away and the grain left in a heap. John the Baptist said the one who would come after him, Christ, would separate the wheat from the chaff with a winnowing fan. Hopkins is beginning to allow this process to happen to him. He consents to it by kissing the hand that held the rod or the winnowing fork. With this comes some joy and the feeling of relief, but he is still wrestling with. He is not clear who or what. He still feels fought against, even as he begins to consent to the process. He is still wrestling in the dark, as in the Old Testament, Jacob wrestled with an angel, only to realize at dawn it was God he was wrestling with. Hopkins has a similar astonished moment when he realizes, oh my God, it's God I'm fighting with. In the morning, God blessed Jacob, changing his name to Israel, the one who strives with God. This sonnet marks a significant moment of spiritual breakthrough. But the job's not finished yet, for Hopkins is battered and bruised by the struggle, even if he has a little more understanding of what's going on. No doubt, like the rest of us, when things are mending or healing or changing in us, we want it all to happen at once. And it will be simple and done so we can get on with the rest of our lives. It is not as simple as that. And that is not how the human heart, psyche and mind works. Hopkins was also finding this out again. Here is what he wrote about it.
Patience, hard thing. The hard thing but to pray, but bid for, patience is. Patience who asks, wants war, wants wounds, weary his times, his tasks. To do without, take tosses, and obey. Rare patience roots in these, and these away nowhere. Natural heart's ivy, patience masks our ruins of wrecked past purpose. There she basks, purple eyes, and seas of liquid leaves all day. We hear our hearts grate on themselves. It kills to bruise them dearer. Yet the rebellious wills of us, we do bid God bend to him, even so. And where is he who no more and more distills delicious kindness? He is patient. Patience fills his crisp combs, and that comes those ways we know.
Hopkins is trying to exercise patience. It's hard. He's trying to do it by sheer willpower. He prays for it, but still his heart is at war, has wounds, is weary, and tries to do the tasks allotted to him by willpower and obedience. Slowly, patience takes root in his heart, like ivy covering over the ruins of his life, as he experiences it. But even the ivy has bruised purple eyes of the ripe berries, and its leaves are like a sea moving in the wind, covering up his past. All of this muscular, strong-minded exercise of patience still hurts. His heart grates on itself. He is trying to kill his rebellious will, sacrifice to God's will. He is still looking for God. It is only at the end of the sonnet that it turns. God gives delicious kindness. His patience with us comes, and he comes to Hopkins in ways which he recognises. It is patience that has brought his beloved Lord back to him, with patience filling his crisp combs of hair. This is the Lord Hopkins loves and has given his life to, and he returns, if only momentarily. There has been a turn in Hopkins' life, in the spiritual trajectory of these sonnets of desolation. And the key moment is to recognise kindness, the kindness of the Lord who comes to him. But much more importantly, Hopkins can now be kind to himself. As he was discovering this, he wrote,
"My own heart, let me more have pity on. Let me live to my sad self, hereafter kind, charitable, not live this tormented mind, but this tormented mind tormenting yet. I cast for comfort I can no more get by groping round my comfortless than blind eyes in the dark can day, or thirst can find thirsts all in an all, a world of wet. Soul, self, come, poor Jack self, I do advise you, jaded, let be. Call off thoughts a while elsewhere. Leave comfort root room. Let joy sighs at God knows when to God knows what. Whose smiles not run seeing, unforeseen times rather, as skies between pine mountains, lights a lovely mile."
Here, Hopkins has turned, has moved, has begun the upward journey out of his desolation, despair and despondency. The turning point is kindness. First he felt some of God's kindness. Then, as his heart heals, as light came back into his life, he can begin to be kind to himself. I have a friend who works in mental health who tells me that it is in accepting that one needs to be kind to oneself that is the first and very important movement out of depression. And so for Hopkins, he realises he can't shift this awful depression into desolation by himself, by his efforts of will, nor by trying to think his way out of it. He needs to call off thoughts a while, just as he was advised by his director when he did his 8-day retreat at Beaumont. He needs to leave space for comfort, to grow, to have root room, and for joy to seize his heart. For him to be moved by the sudden sight of a beautiful sky when travelling in the mountains, that sky which lights a lovely mile for the weary spiritual traveller. This is all very sensible advice to himself, and it would seem this marks the end of the arc of the sonnets of desolation, which went from the loneliness of the outsider into the deep places of depression and despair and almost paralysis of will. Slowly, with patience and kindness towards himself, Hopkins emerges with his love of God and his sense of presence restored. But it is not back to the fizzing joy of his time at St. Bino's and of the wonderful sonnets celebrating God and nature. where he has landed is a much more solid and committed place of one who has been through really awful times and has survived by the grace of God. There is a final poem from this period that I would like to share, one less often quoted. It was found on a scrap of paper among his belongings after his death. Noah Mackenzie, the Hopkins scholar, identified the paper as the same as that of Hopkins' Dublin notebooks. This seems like an appropriate place to leave Gerard as he emerges from his spiritual ordeal. He has travelled from desolation to consolation. He has found how to live in hope. But that hope is not the simple hope for something that you are pretty sure will happen. It is a theological hope that trusts and hopes against the odds and with no assurance about the future. Note the echoes of St. Paul seeing now in a mirror darkly. Hope is here personified as a woman holding a mirror. Hope holds to Christ the mind's own mirror out, to take his lovely likeness more and more. It will not well, so she would bring about a growing burnish brighter than before, and turns to wash it from her welling eyes, and breathes the blots off, all with sighs on sighs. Her glass is blessed, but she, as good as blind, holds till hand aches and wonders what is there. Her glass drinks light, she darkles down behind, and all of her glorious gainings unaware. I told you that she turns her mirror dim between whiles, but she sees herself, not him. We're going to have a slightly longer break, and I suggest that you might like to take that to talk to your neighbour, because this is heavy stuff, and just a few moments talking to each other, and we'll have a longer break. Anthony, give us the time.
Jill, thank you so much. I think that if we regroup for the fourth session for 2 o'clock, and that'll be the same for those joining us at home. And whether we are joining us on our own or with others, as Jill has said, let's make the most of this little break now. Do feel free to use the church building and scatter around if you wish, or indeed to chat to your neighbour as you wish. Thank you so much. See you all back at 2.